So let's welcome Heather and her talk, Are We Raising Robots? All of the parents of young children that I know hope that I don't like their kids too much, because the kids that I like the best, my favorites, are the troublemakers. And while that's very true, I still found myself standing in the kitchen of one of the preschools that I own, talking to a parent and telling her that it was best for her kid and for all the kids in the school if her son did not return after that day. And we stood there both on the verge of tears, knowing that we had done everything. We had paid for expensive therapy services. We had gotten this child school district supports and driven him to and from them every day. He had been with us since he was 12 months old. He was 4.5. He was very connected with his teachers, and it wasn't working. And as we stood there, both trying not to cry, I'm picturing this adorable, sweet, blonde-haired, blue-eyed little boy who would melt your heart with his hugs and who would bring back a shiny rock from therapy every day to put in his treasure box. She managed to get out one sentence, and that was that if I couldn't help her child, no one could. I had my master's degree in social work with children and families. We had made plan after plan for this child. His teachers loved him so much. They set clear expectations, had good routines, and yet despite all of that, Simon had thrown a shovel directly at his teacher's face that morning with the intent to harm. Simon knew that if he hurt somebody, he would get out of class and get to spend some time at the front desk. And despite all that we were doing, this pattern was getting worse, and if I didn't ask him to leave, someone was going to get seriously hurt. This wasn't the first time that we had pulled out all the stops and we couldn't figure out what would make the difference for one specific child. And I know that we can't be all things for all kids, but something about some of these cases was bothering me. And so, as I do, I started doing research and reading and studying and trying to find some sort of key. And I started reading a book about child development and neuroscience. And I came across a chapter. And the chapter was talking about this nationally recognized program. And that program focuses on teaching kids self-regulation skills. And in the book, there's a story about a kindergarten class who's using this program. And they leave their classroom one day and they go to the cafeteria. And in the cafeteria, all of the other kids who are there start a food fight. And as the story goes, not one of these kindergartners participated in that food fight. Not one of them threw any pieces of food. And they went back to class and told their teacher about how crazy all these other kids were. Now, I heard some of you say in the audience, a little piece of us sings at this story, right? The teachers in us and the parents in us, that clearly this program had gotten through to every single one of those 5-year-olds, and they did not participate. But I want you to stop for a second, as I did, and think about any 5-year-old you know, or about yourself as a 5-year-old, and then 30 of those little brains. And what was running through their head on that day was not, I don't really like participating in things that are messy and raucous and disorganized. I'm 5 and that's not for me. And what was going through their brains was not, somebody's going to have to clean this up. It's going to be a mess and there's going to be germs. That's not what they were thinking. What was going through their heads was that the goal of school is to comply, and the rules for compliance are that we don't throw food. And I am not going to do this because my teacher doesn't want me to. And these kids were not acting like children, and they were not thinking like children, and they were not thinking like children to the extent that they went back to their classroom and tattled on the other kids who were. And I just sat there and I think these kids are not behaving like kids. These kids are behaving like programmed robots. Now, I am for sure part of this problem of teaching compliance. I am pretty sure that I've given trainings with the title, How to Help Kids Comply Better. I'm pretty sure there are speeches of mine out there like that. We think that compliance is what will get us through the day, and certainly serving 150 kids every day, it would make my life a whole lot easier if all of them were thinking the same thoughts as me, and if all of them were doing exactly what each and every one of their teachers said. And if I read that story about the lunchroom with compliance as my goal, I am comforted. But if I read that story and my goal for young children is critical thinking, I am terrified. Not only do we think that compliance is the goal, but all of the data scales out there, the things that we judge whether or not something is good for early childhood and whether or not kids are learning, literally kids pass those tests by conforming and complying. Those are words on those tests. And I've looked at a lot of those tests in my career, in my studies, and all of the other things, and very rarely, if ever, do I find any tests that ask if kids can think and decide things. And that's what we need to change. So what I want you to think about this a little bit differently, because I'm not sure that any of you believe me yet, but that's okay, we'll get there. So when we teach kids to mimic instead of to think, we do them a huge disservice. So I want you to think of this. When we want to teach little kids how to have good manners, then we teach them to say please, right? Please is the magic word. Please is how you get what you want. And so a child asks for some ice cream, and you say, what's the magic word? They say please, and they get ice cream. But think about that same kid when they are 14 and they're standing in front of their boyfriend and he asks her to do something she doesn't want to do, and then he says the word please. Please is the magic word, and please is supposed to get you what you want. And in addition to that, this child has been in classrooms from when she was little that in order to be a good kid, you literally fell in line. You sat when others were sitting, you didn't question the directions, and you only spoke when you were called on. So now she's in front of her boyfriend and she wants to be good, and he said the magic word, and she has to, and all that we have taught her is to comply. So I started this talk talking about a kid who was causing physical harm for other children and teachers, and that's clearly not the answer. And now I've just tried to convince you that teaching kids to be robots isn't the answer either. So what is the answer? Well, the good news is that we've done a lot of research in brain science over the last decade and a little bit more, and we do know some things that we need to do, and we aren't getting it all wrong. But the bad news is, the really bad news, because we're really bad at it, is that we as adults are going to have to change. And we are going to have to change our goals from compliance to critical thinking. Now, if you haven't gathered already, I'm a really big nerd about brain science. I really like it. I really look at it, and I look at programs and other things, and I look at the neuroscience that is telling us why kids are doing what they're doing and why these programs are working or not working. And when I look at that brain science, and my goal is compliance, I get to one answer. But if I look at that same brain science with my goal is critical thinking, a whole new pattern develops. So in general, with brain science with young children, what we're trying to do is get them to develop what are called the executive skills in the frontal lobe of their brain. And these executive skills are things like decision making and perseverance and problem solving and all of those kind of critical thinking pieces. And that's our goal with kids. And the way to get your brain to do anything is to practice it over and over and over again. So think about the messages that we give to kids over and over again. So I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to picture a classroom, an early childhood classroom with young children hanging out, and there are Santa Clauses on the walls, and they all have pointy, triangle, red Santa hats that are made out of construction paper, and they all have fluffy white beards made out of cotton balls. And the kids are coming to circle as their teacher calls them to the rug and tells them that they're doing a good job and that they really like how Billy is sitting today. You can open your eyes now if you want to. And this classroom sounds familiar and lovely and exactly what we want for all of our children and where they are, right? But where in that classroom is critical thinking? In that classroom, those kids are all trying to please the teacher. They are trying to make their Santa Clauses look as much like hers as possible. They hope that she judges them as good when they come to the circle, and they are trying desperately to figure out what Billy did to get to be the favorite that day. And that's all fine and good when the person to please, it's kind of fine and good, when the person to please is an early childhood teacher who probably has a degree and a nice voice, and she's been background checked. But think about it, when the person to please is your group of friends, when you're 14 outside of the mall and they want you to smoke a cigarette. What if the person to please when you're 18 is your new idol in a band and they have started doing a fad diet that is clearly dangerous? What if the person to please when you're 30 is your boss who wants you to change just a couple of numbers on that tax document? Or what if the person to please when you're 45 is your political idol who has started saying things that are against your moral code? Are we supposed to comply? Have we taught anybody anything else? But what if we change it? What if we change the whole point? What if from when kids are very young, the point is critical thinking? What if when Billy comes to the rug, we tell the kids that he is sitting with his hands quietly and that his voice isn't loud, and so other kids can hear the story, and we haven't told them that they need to be like Billy, but we've given them some information on how to cooperate with others in the group? What if instead we show them a whole bunch of different kinds of Santas and give them a bunch of art materials and tell them they can do whatever they want to make whatever Santa they want, and then we point out how different kids are using different materials to create different pieces of artwork? What if the 14-year-old knows that you will have a discussion with her about how to make a decision about cigarettes or her boyfriend without judging her and telling her that everything she thinks is right or wrong? What skills does she then have at 18 and at 30 and at 45? Now, compliance-based systems for kids rely on them trying to guess and to read the minds of adults. And healthy brain development is not about reading minds. Healthy brain development is about asking questions and trying new things and failing and trying again. It is why kids learn the best through play and games where it doesn't matter if you fail. When we set up schools and communities where the goal is compliance, kids like Simon are breaking down. If we want to change our world, we need to start giving kids opportunities to play, just to play. They need to make up their own rules. They need to try and they need to fail, and they need to know that they have time to have their own thoughts, not trying to read ours. If we want to change our kids and our schools and our community and our world, we are going to have to start to get uncomfortable about some things. We are going to have to accept that it is okay when kids aren't complying and conforming and obeying. Now, this is, this does not mean that the 5-year-old can cross the street by themselves, and does not mean that just because he thought about it ahead of time, Billy can hit somebody to take their block. That's not what I'm trying to say here. That, there are nuances when it comes to health and safety things. But the key is that kids are deciding things for themselves over and over again, and they are practicing that critical thinking piece that we talked about earlier, practicing to build their brains. Every day Simon came to class, he went into class with 20 other kids and 4 teachers, and he tried desperately to read each and every one of their minds and figure out what he should do in order to be a good kid. Simon thought that if he couldn't be that kind of good, whatever kind of good was in each of their heads, that he was failing at his class, and if he was failing at class, he was failing at life. When he left class and he would come up to the front desk, he was back to his happy and normal self, and he could do all of the things that he was unable to do in class because he didn't have any class to conform to. And what Simon thought he knew was that in order to be good, to look like everyone else and do the same things as everyone else and never stand out. But what Simon didn't know was that we need the kids who stand out. We need the troublemakers. We need the Simons. Now, I'm not sure that all of you are with me yet here today. So as I end, I would like to give you a thought to have tomorrow morning when you wake up and you think of something in your world that you wish was different. And that is, what I want you to think is, that the only thing keeping children from being the change we want to see in the world is us telling them not to be. Thank you.